topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4WN Radio.
This is Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. Do you want to live a more fulfilling life? Do you want to live your legacy and achieve your personal, professional, and financial goals? Well, coming up on Divya Parekh's Beyond Confidence, you will hear real stories of leaders, entrepreneurs, and achievers who have stepped into discomfort, shattered their status quo, and are living the life they want. You will learn how relationships are the key to achieving your aspirations and financial goals. Moving your career or business forward does not have to happen at the expense of your personal or family life, or vice versa. Learn more at www.divyaparekh.com, and you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. This is Beyond Confidence, and now here's your host, Divya Parekh.
Good morning. So thrilled to be here with y'all. It is just amazing and fascinating because it's Tuesday. So I want to share a wonderful story that happened very recently. So I was doing a workshop, and the workshop was around the challenge of change. And what was interesting was, as we were going through that, what is change? And one thing that we drove home as I was working with my cohort of leaders, that change is certain. Nothing else is certain. And what was interesting was that there were few people in there who wanted to leave a little bit earlier so that they would avoid hitting traffic. And then all of a sudden what happened was, because we went through certain principles in there, one of them being appreciative inquiry, and they thought, you know what, there are other people who are driving longer. So if we change times, it will impact others. And what was beautiful about that was that right there within that one day, you're seeing this caring. I mean, I'm sure these are very caring people, but they're thinking and applying the principles right there and then. And that translated into kindness, thinking about others. So it's also important for you to take a moment. I'm not saying that you got to think about others all the time, but spend that time. It's just an hour a month, which is not a lot. Thinking about others with no strings attached, and see what you can do for them. Another thing to keep in mind is that if you are looking to enhance your life, if you are looking to become the better version of yourself and elevate yourself, whether in business or in leadership, our 2 books, Expert to Influencer, will help you position yourself as a leader for impact. And The Entrepreneur's Garden will help you create that wonderful harmony between life and work and your business. Not only that, you help us with part of the proceeds going to kiva.org, where we are helping other entrepreneurs. So thank you again for joining us. And let's bring our guest in. Welcome, Michael.
Good morning, Divya. How are you?
Doing well.
Good.
So good to have you. So usually we start out sometime in your childhood or early teens. Is there a moment or a person that impacted you positively? And if you still remember that moment or person to this day?
Yeah, to this day, some people may not have been exposed, but I wrestled in high school, and I was on the wrestling team. And I'm not sure if you're familiar, but every morning before you wrestled in a meet, you would have to weigh in, and you'd have to weigh in to make sure that you were at the weight you were wrestling at. And so one morning I came in and I was 1/4 pound overweight. And I thought to myself, as I looked at the coach, because that's who was weighing us in, it's just 1/4 pound. And he said to me that, you know what, do you want to win and not have the credit for doing it because you cheated? And at that point, I put on a sweatsuit and went and ran. But I've always remembered the fact that taking a shortcut isn't ever worth it without putting in the effort. And so that's one of the examples I think that's always stuck with me.
I've never heard of that. So let me ask you this. This begs the next question. So when you say the weight, does it have to be exact? So let's say the weight is 210, or is there a range?
No, you have to weigh 210 or less, and that your scales are calibrated so that when you come in to weigh in, you know that the person you're going to wrestle that night weighed in also and is at least 210 or less. And that was the criteria. And I was a quarter of a pound over. My weight was not 210, it was 125, but in high school. And I had to make that weight, and I knew it coming in, but I just didn't put in the effort the night before because I thought I'll be close. But his credibility, what he built right there, was what I've always considered a character builder, because by showing me that there's no value in cheating, it also which carried on in other parts of my life in the future, just really set the framework and the groundwork for other things as you dealt with business and you look at things on what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah, no, that is powerful, because it is not about doing the right things when somebody's watching us. It is about doing the right things when nobody's watching, because you're always watching, you know who you are and where you stand, and that inner strength. And as you develop that character, that's what gives one confidence and the courage to keep on going after giant leaps, even when you're taking baby steps. So share with us, you were in wrestling, and what were your interests, and what happened in your life next?
Well, during high school, I had an instructor. This was, again, back in the 60s, early 70s. And I had an instructor who had access to the IBM data center at night. And he took a small group of us from class and would allow us to go in and be exposed to that environment to see what it really was at that time. And at that time, if you can imagine, it was punch cards. So you literally programmed with punch cards, but it created a spark in me. And I became a computer science major in college. And that's really what kind of the experience that drove me then as I continued to wrestle through college and with an interest in computer science at the same time. And then after college, computer science continued to carry on my career.
And this goes back again to exposure, that when people are exposed, and especially the young ones, whether it is primary school, elementary school or middle school or high school, when kids are exposed, if they're not exposed, they don't know if they like it or not. So all the more reason to get exposure to different things, to see, what takes your fancy or what catches your passion, so to speak. So at that time, people in tech were not as prevalent as they're now. So as you kind of continued your career, where did you go next?
Actually, after college, I went to work for AT&T corporate. And it was about the time when Judge Green, I still remember the name, broke up AT&T. And you may not remember this, in 1984, the government stepped in and broke up AT&T because they considered them having a monopoly. A lot of people aren't aware that AT&T was the largest computer maker in the world. The only difference was the fact that they bought every computer for themselves that they made. So even though they were bigger than IBM, they had ever sold one computer. So when Judge Green stepped in, broke up AT&T corporate, we had a meeting. And so they were looking to start a computer division that would offer AT&T computers to the commercial market. So having a comp sci background, we met in a room and they said, who in this room is interested in getting involved in starting up this new company? There's obviously a risk, but we're going to back you, obviously, because we were backed by Bell Labs and AT&T. Funny enough, it's always one of those things, watch what you volunteer for. I was the only person in the room that raised his hand. And so at that point, I helped to found in the state of Iowa, AT&T Computer Systems, and then started a 6-year career introducing the market to AT&T computers that had never been sold before. They had their limits, they had their strengths, but that's how I really got started in the commercial side of computer programming.
Very interesting. So What was it that made you raise your hand?
It was the interest that I felt like my experience of already through high school, the small exposure, college, obviously studying it. I was very comfortable and analytic to where the rest of the group was more of a marketing organization, marketing AT&T solutions to business customers. So when the topic came up, I felt like I was maybe uniquely qualified to do that, and not because of deep experience, but at least the exposure I'd had to tackle it. And again, sometimes that entrepreneurial spirit, that you don't define it as that till after, because at the time it interests you and you pursue it. And that's what really started and launched my entire career, actually.
Very interesting. So as you were growing the company, what would you say, as you mentioned that it was the first time AT&T computers were on the market, what would you say were a few hiccups that you experienced or some lessons? Because what has happened after pandemic is there are a lot of millennials and Gen Z who want to start up their own company, and they're out there with these big dreams. So what I want to discuss today is, and I love that they want to start their companies, but we want to help them position themselves for success rather than finding that it's just a dream, because dreams without a strong foundation can break very quickly.
Yeah, the exposure that I had is the fact that actually the hiccup created and caused me to leave the company. So because I was in the market every day offering to clients AT&T solutions, but the clients were coming back asking for things that AT&T couldn't offer, even though I knew they were available. And so AT&T, being a very captive company, would not sell that technology to the client, but it was available. So I actually quit AT&T on a Friday and stopped into my office on Monday and made a sales call on my boss. And I said, I know I can design exactly what the clients are wanting. I can build it, and then you'll win because you'll be selling AT&T computers. And so my boss actually became my first client the Monday after I quit. And soon after that, then I built and programmed programs for some of the large Ladies Home Journal magazine. If you could imagine this, I wrote all the software to automate the magazine. And until I did that, the magazine was done on typewriters. And so that'll give you an idea of the automation and the time where I was in the market. So it was actually that hiccup was that frustration that, and I and AT&T knew they had a solution for the client, but they wouldn't offer it. But I knew I could, so I decided to leave. And on top of that, I still remember the evening I came home to tell my wife she was 6 months pregnant, and my mother-in-law happened to be there, and she said, "You what?" Because at that point I'd had a very successful career at AT&T. And so I decided that it was time to do this. It was an opportunity, and I thought I would grasp it.
Definitely. So what I'm hearing is that you saw what the market needed, because there was that gap. They were looking for that technology. And then that is the key, because so many times what happens is people have an idea. People think that, yes, this is going to be great. Let me market it. And they build the whole company without even testing, which is, going fit to market. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, if you keep in mind of what I just said, actually, I'd been in the market test marketing as an AT&T employee. So I already knew what the market wanted. And after a few years had really validated it and had a few conversations with clients that if you could get this from AT&T, would you buy it? And then I would just say, I wouldn't offer to do it for them, but let me go to bat for you internally. And after hitting some walls there, I found that the opportunity was real. I had validated it. And that's the thing, you really kind of hit on something, is so many entrepreneurs just jump in because they think it's a great idea, but don't have any firsthand experience or experience in that space because they think it's a great idea. And I used to consult with the PhD program at a college, and it was with their Center for Advanced Technology Development, because every PhD has a great idea, but it's not a business. There's more great ideas on the shelf than there are businesses. And so that was the idea, is to parse that, because if anybody, this is an old book. It's called Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore. And it's a book I've used as guidance through my career. And it talks about how there's a chasm between an idea developing and going to market. And then the biggest thing you have of failure is early success, because that early success distracts you from what drove you to start the company, because you're so buried in delivering that first product. And then the problem is entrepreneurship steps in and you want the perfect product. So you continue to try to build the perfect product, which you shouldn't really ever do. And you hit a chasm where you now start to run out of resources, you run out of money. And then can you get across that chasm and survive with the clients that you have? So it's an interesting guidebook, very old, but it's something that helped a lot as I started my career.
Well, here's what I will say, that books never get old, because especially if the principles are timeless.
Right.
And we know, like, one of the books that is classic, right? Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And it still stands true to this day. So some principles just don't go out of trend, because human nature, regardless of wherever we are, whether we are in industrial age, information age, or now AI age, it's going to change. Yes, our needs will change, and yet the way we approach things, some of the basic things remain the same. So now let's say, you've talked about they can go read that book. Based on your experience, a young millennial wants to start their company. What are few things that they need to keep in mind?
Well, the biggest concern that even the Crossing the Chasm talks about are resources. Having access to resources to be able to not only reach the market, but be able to survive it. And the key thing is that seems like a simple issue, but what it also does is it validates the idea with other people, because you're going to go out and ask friends and family, maybe angel investors, usually at an early stage, or if you're lucky enough, if your idea is big enough, to get in front of venture capitalists. And your idea then will be vetted as you go through, and you're going to be asked questions that you hadn't thought of answers for, and it'll give you a chance to continue to vet your idea. Is it really viable? Will people buy it? And I had one venture capitalist tell me, can you prove to me the dogs will eat the food? Will somebody buy this? And so that's really the thing that I saw as a guiding principle, is by actually getting the capital, which you do with the idea of, well, I just want to make payroll or pay myself or buy some equipment that I need. But what really the process does of raising capital is vets your idea against people who have a better exposure, a wider view of the market, or more experience. And that gives you then that validation. And then obviously, if some of those of your potential customers could be those potential investors, that even expands the opportunity.
I really like what you hit upon, that your potential customer is your potential investor. Because if they're the end user, then they will be vested in your product. They'll be vested in your success. So for example, when you have gone through the seed funding, then they see that if you're making progress, they will be more open to give you line of credit and help your company grow. So going back to you started this new business right when your wife was 6 months pregnant. So tell us, what was the next stop?
Well, and I want to expand on what you just said, because also having that early client as a potential partner or investor, it also gives you instant feedback on product improvement, because your idea of what the product is may not be what the industry or the market wants, and their feedback's invaluable. And I still remember with early clients, them giving me feedback that the changes I made were critical in the success of the product. And so, but to carry on to your question, from that, I had left AT&T. And during this time, unbeknownst to me, Creighton University had spent $50 million building an AI expert system. They got done and they didn't know what to do with it, but AT&T was the computer supplier to Creighton University. So they contacted their AT&T rep and they said, we've got this product, we think it should be commercialized, but we don't know what to do. And so at that point, the AT&T rep says, that's not really what we do, but I do know somebody in Des Moines, Iowa. And I got a cold call from Creighton University telling me this whole story in a lot longer form than I just gave it to you. And so we ended up with taking that idea. I said, and obviously I didn't have the funding to outsource, and it's called technology transfer. So I didn't have the funding to do a tech transfer deal at that point. So I took it, documented as well as I could, and then went to venture capitalists and laid it out to let them vet the idea. And so I was lucky enough, and one of the early venture capitalists who looked at the idea and did agree to fund it actually became a partner of mine in venture capitalists. I've done 16 rounds of venture capital. He's participated in every round since I've started. We've done 2 IPOs together, and he actually just passed last year. But by doing that technology transfer, we then took the rights to that technology, integrated, then expanded the AI and built what became the first electronic medical record for hospitals with integrated AI to ever go public on NASDAQ. And then the company was later sold to 3M Healthcare. So that was really kind of the short path to the leap to getting into from computer technology into AI.
Yeah, and this is what is also telling us about creativity, that you may not have had resources at the time, but you documented it. And you were able to see that this could be valuable. So sometimes, rather than saying no to an opportunity, so many times what happens is that people are risk averse. And because they're risk averse, they will say no to an opportunity. So sometimes when there is lack of experience, youngsters or millennials or Gen Z may be thinking, should I go or should I not go for this opportunity? So you saw something in 2 opportunities as to what we have talked about. What could they, how could they process an opportunity and vet it in a way that, well, you can never confirm anything fully, because that's what life is. You take an opportunity, you go with it. But what could they do so that would give them a certain level of comfort before taking that leap?
I found that as I've started businesses, I drilled down to become as knowledgeable as I could in that topic, even to a point of becoming an expert. And so I knew that. And then the second thing is being an expert in who the potential client is. So for example, I just talked about the electronic medical record company. A big issue I heard as I talked to doctors and hospitals was 35% of the time when the doctor came to the hospital room to visit the patient chart was not there because the patient was off having an x-ray, having tests done. And back in those days with hard paper medical records, the chart went with the patient. So that doctor's visit was wasted. And so doctors were very inefficient. So the idea came that what if I could get electronic version of that record and keep it that way it was available, whether you were off having a test or not, because when the doctor came to do rounds, he could read the most recent tests, the most recent testing that you had done, or even blood pressures and pulses. And so now all of a sudden the doctor became more efficient. So by validating that application, that's one example, but by making sure that you've got firsthand experience in the market, as opposed to I'm going to bring a new idea to the market, you do need that partner, that person who will give you that insight to say, yeah, this is an idea that's worth pursuing, or no, it's not. Then you always know if they're serious, if they're willing to fund it or partner with you to get it done. So they have to have confidence in you to be able to deliver it. And then obviously confidence that you know enough to get it done, and then obviously be able to do it. So I had a venture capitalist, again, once tell me that there's really 3 things they look for in an opportunity to invest in a startup company with young people, is the fact that they need to make sure, is there management in place to carry out the plan? Does the plan have a national footprint? So they want to make sure this isn't a regional solution. And can you protect it? Can you make money and protect it? Because the last thing they want to do is invest in a company, an idea, and then you prove the market, and then somebody sweeps in and copies it. And there's always somebody smarter or bigger. So you have to know that it's protected. So is it protectable? Is it an idea that you can with intellectual property or patents protect? Does it have a national presence or footprint? So is it applicable to people across the country? Because then that's how you can get an ROI on your investment. And then obviously, are you the right person to carry this strategy out?
Oh, very powerful. So is it is my interpretation, or what I'm thinking is that, were you the one who created the EMRs?
Actually, it was a collaboration. So the university came out and obviously had built the early portion of the AI. I had the idea for the electronic medical record because of, you'll see in my book that I just recently published, I talk about how this impacted several people in different ways that I've described. And so I saw several challenges and opportunities to do that. And then as we transferred the technology, we found that the AI needed to be expanded. So I did another round of technology investment and actually went to 2 universities, gave them having a computer science background, I wrote the scope of what we were trying to accomplish, and then had the 2 universities compete to deliver that, which they did accomplish. We purchased the rights to that from the university and then embedded it into the product before we took it public. So it's a mix of having an idea and then expanding on it, because just what that proved was my single idea was valuable, but I could make it invaluable by doing some of those other things that I talked about. And keep in mind, this was AI, neural networks, expert systems, and it was 1992.
So it's been around for quite a while.
And well, I didn't have anybody to model after, so I truly was having to blaze some new trails.
Definitely. And as you mentioned about the idea of having a national footprint, your is in like every doctor's office now. And I don't remember like when it was, a law was passed or something like that, that they were given a grace period, but all medical offices and hospitals had to transfer to EMRs. And that is just amazing. Like, what an amazing journey that you've had. So you mentioned that you have taken a couple of your companies to IPO. Now, when you're private, the journey from going from private to becoming an IPO can be brutal. It can be very difficult and can be like a adventurous roller coaster. So can you like share what does it take and what could people look out for?
Well, in that case, once the business proves itself, and what they're looking for is those 3 tenets that I just described earlier. Are you the right management? Is the idea viable? And can it have a great return for investors? Because keep in mind, at that point, people are going to invest. And the big thing that they look for really is revenue, recurring revenue, and revenue that can give that investor in a public market that buys stock in your company a return on that investment, because there's so many stocks to pick from. They could put it, why should they put it in your company as opposed to the other company? So you have to have a story that's unique, that looks like you're the next new thing and that you're going to come in. And at the point when we went public, there were only 2 electronic medical record companies in the entire US, ourselves and another company called Clinicom. But we were the only one to go public because that gave us the uniqueness to carve out a segment of the market. And so during that process, then once you realize that, you typically go to New York, go to Wall Street, because that's where the investment bankers are, and you tell your story. And by telling that story, it catches somebody's attention, and hopefully more than one. And then they really give you offers on taking the company public. Here's how we'll structure it. Here's what we'll do. Here's the pricing. And then at that point, you hire an attorney or attorneys, and you build what's called a prospectus. And the prospectus then is really that story, but with all of the risk factors identified, because you don't want anybody to come back and say, well, I invested in this, but you didn't tell me this could happen. So you have to think of everything bad that could happen, so you've at least made investors aware of that. And then you write a prospectus and you submit it to the Securities and Exchange Commission for review. They mark it up with a red pen, so it became known as a red herring. So you'd get the red back, and then you'd make your edits and respond to those questions. And then at that point, once you pass that hurdle, you then would go and the investment bankers would get the stock registered. And then at that point, you would go public. You get a phone call the morning of the IPO, and it's the banker saying, here's the price we got now. I should step back and talk about, once you get that done, you also do a roadshow. So you don't just let the stock doesn't just go public. Now, this is old school. It's not today's world. So your millennial listeners actually will probably do this virtually or online. But we literally did a roadshow where we went city to city through the US and Canada and presented our story to potential investment groups. So the bankers would put these groups together. We would walk in for 30 minutes, tell our story, and then walk out and go to the next city. And we did that for 2 weeks straight. And then they build what's called a book. And the book is, here are verbal orders that we've gotten that people that like this story. And you always want your book to be twice as big as the number of the shares of stock that you want to sell, because you know a lot will cancel the last day. So then at that point, you go get ready to trade, you have a symbol, and then it starts trading, and you get a call from the banker that these people did buy in. And then there's an entire discussion about institutional investors, private investors, and that discussion carries it on to how do you maintain a stock price. But that gives you a little bit of the path as you go public.
Oh, very comprehensive, Michael. Thank you. And that's what happens, is that this is the knowledge that you have, you've experienced it, and the way you have shared it is very insightful. So now going back to your story, as you went through these IPOs, you mentioned about bringing it into the healthcare system. So tell me, what was it that was driving you to pursue that route, and give us more insight into that.
Well, I cover this in one of the chapters early in my book, and my book's called The Untold Story of the Opioid Crisis in American Healthcare. But I talk about how the fact that when I was young, I was diagnosed with cancer. And so I was actually admitted to the hospital, and I went in and had what I knew was a major surgery, but they didn't make me aware of what the aftermath was going to be, that I was going to be in ICU, I was going to have tubes coming throughout, I'm going to be on a ventilator, the entire litany. But I wasn't really ready for that. And if I would have known, I could have probably mentally prepared for that. So when I came out of surgery, I found myself panicking on what happened, what went wrong. And luckily, my fiance at the time, who's now my wife of 43 years, but my fiance said, no, you're fine. Everything was great. And I'm saying, well, this doesn't look great to me. And so at that point, I decided what was missing and what was really the thing that happened. And what happened was the medical professionals didn't do what's called patient teaching, prepare me for what it's going to not only be as you go into the surgery, but what's going to be like after. And that's really mine. This was a long time ago. So at that point, I decided, as I had an opportunity to invest in this or start this AI company, that I needed to build that into the system, because that personal experience maybe even differentiated us from other systems that were in the market, because I had that firsthand experience with what the needs were for the market, not from the medical side, but from the patient side.
Well, I'm very glad that you're doing well, and that is a thing of the past. So when you said that from a patient side, so when you talk about from a patient side, so you've talked about the patient teaching, and you have also touched upon opioid crisis. Can you tell us what is the current situation? I know the situation is dire, but how does it get integrated into a patient? So as you mentioned, there is pain or something is happening, and how from just kind of being a medicine that you're taking, you become dependent on.
Yeah, and I'll touch a little bit on how I even came to that, which is just as we took the company public, we sold it. And almost at the exact same time, my oldest son and his best friend got involved with drugs. And the friend passed away. And so my wife and I felt like we'd been blessed with time and resources. So we thought we'd get involved in the local drug treatment programs or a community. But we found that the results were terrible. And we really didn't want to affiliate because we just didn't think they were acceptable. Now, they were the national standards. They felt like they were doing as good as anybody, but it just wasn't acceptable in my mind. And so we started with a white piece of paper, and we said, what are the best evidence-based programs? What's the best research in the country? And let's build something around that. We had the resources, we had the time. And so we actually started what, if you fast forward 12 years, one of the largest drug treatment programs in the US. We had 300 patients in residence daily on average. And we were in Des Moines, Iowa, which is not exactly resort or destination country, but 80% of our patients came from California, New York, Florida, Texas, because of the uniqueness that we had broken down the brain chemistry to understand that addiction was really a big problem. It was a chemistry problem, not a character problem. And when we took that viewpoint, we were able to have some amazing outcomes. We had 84% of our opioid patients who had left the program 4 years after departing were still alive and working and sober. And so that was really where we got involved in understanding. We had a significant opioid detox center. And as you may not know, there's only really two drugs you detox from: opioids and alcohol. Other drugs you can kind of titrate down from, but opioids and alcohol you should have medically managed. And so many people don't go to opioid detox. They go straight into treatment. And that's why there's such a high failure rate. Only about 30% of people that don't go through detox complete opioid treatment. So, and that's an entirely different discussion. And so from that, then we learned that what was critical. And so we sold that company to a venture capital roll-up out of Nashville in 2019. And then obviously, as we all know, COVID hit. So I had a year to think and to say, somebody's got to be doing this, because I found myself with hundreds of thousands of opioid data points. And at the same time, as as we've already discussed, a passion for healthcare technology. And that's really how the company was born, because I found that everybody was applying to try and help the patient who was addicted. Mm-hmm. Nobody was really viewing it as, how can I stop this? How can I prevent this? 75% of every patient who enters an opioid treatment program started with a prescription written by their doctor and paid for by their insurance company. So right away, that gave me an idea that maybe we're looking at the wrong place. Maybe if I got on the other side of the formula and prevented patients from getting addicted, I wouldn't have to worry about a success rate in treatment, because my success rate in prevention is 100%, because you never progress to addiction, where my success rate inside of our treatment center, as great as it was never going to reach 100%.
Wow. Congratulations. That is a huge problem. And thank you. Thank you for tackling it, because it's so important that we do something beyond ourselves and leave a legacy, and that can make a huge difference. So tell us more about your book and how this AI is making a difference in people's lives, how it is preventing at the source rather than letting it mushroom and make it like, yes, people can go for detox treatment and all that, but how can it be prevented? So do share with us.
Well, we've built that company now I have 1,700 employers in the US who use our AI software to actually scan their claims to identify patients who are progressing towards potentially addiction, so that they can intervene and correct that. But I'll give you one example. We have a large school district in Central Florida. We've reduced unnecessary opioid usage in the school district 70%. And at the same time, we have been able to reduce the expenses for the school district almost $1.5 million, because you may not be aware, but a patient on opioids uses healthcare 3 times more than the employee or the patient that's not on opioids. And so there's a big indicator for us. So it's not only saved lives, but it saves money. And so that school district, the unique piece is, because of AI, and we're able to do this in the background, we're in our 3rd year installed in that school district, and the teachers still don't know we're there, because they've never been asked, they've never been identified, or they've never been intervened on, because we only identify the doctors who are letting this happen, not the patients that it's happening to.
So this is a great use of AI, because, a lot of people are apprehensive of AI. And if properly implemented and properly used, it can save lives. So,
I was going to add, that's really funny you touched on that, because the first 2 years of the company, we never mentioned AI, even though it was deeply integrated into the program, because that was my background. But we felt like AI had a bad connotation. And at that point, but it seems like in the last year, it has become more accepted on the positive sense. Obviously, this is not a chat GPT kind of program, but it's a program really used to find indicators that are buried inside of a medical record. So for example, the indicators we're finding, until we developed this program, could not be found. They're not found in any system in the US. And so we've just recently in the last year started to pull the covers back and let people know that it's actually AI based because of just that point you were making.
Mm-hmm. So now let's say from a patient's perspective. So we have AI on this side, but what a patient could do for themselves where
go ahead. Sorry.
so where they're not reaching that opioid crisis.
Well, in a patient, obviously what we do is patients, you have to have a pain diagnosis to be able to prescribe an opioid. Mm-hmm. And you can actually become chemically dependent to an opioid within 3 to 4 days. And chemically dependence means you're not an addict or you're not addicted, but if you abruptly discontinue, you'll actually feel illnesses. And so that's one of the things that we use as indicators are the fact that when you're deprived of an opioid, we saw this every day in our opioid detox center because 100% of the patients who came into an opioid detox center went through withdrawal. And withdrawal is from an aspect, most people would call it craving, but actually what it is the body screaming out that it's being deprived an opioid because it's become accustomed to it. And the way it screams out is it makes you sick. I'm going to make you nauseated until you give me an opioid. I'm going to not let you sleep until you give me an opioid. I'm going to make you anxious until you give me an opioid. And the patients find that not only when they take the opioid, the pain alleviates, but so do those effects and those symptoms. But those symptoms can actually be pretty significant medical issues. And those are the indicators we're looking for inside using AI to trickle through and segregate those. And then look for the doctors, because we know who the doctors are that wrote those prescriptions. And that's an indicator for increased training and necessity for them. So the discussion about patients and opioids is a deep one. And so there's several different tacks there with patients that are on opioids. The bigger thing starts with the family and not accepting unreasonable thoughts or actions. That's the biggest thing, because you don't want to be somebody who's helping them continue, because it will not get better. Opioid abusers, you don't see many old opioid abusers. They either die or they quit. And that's the challenge with that drug. Different than most other drugs. Because the problem is opioids, they don't take them for a euphoric effect. They take them to feel normal, as opposed to other drugs you can imagine you're taking it for that euphoric effect. And so it gets to a point where, because of those illnesses I described, when you take the opioid, they go away, so you feel better.
So what I'm hearing is that it's also very critical for people to get educated, as far as even the healthcare professionals need to get educated at different levels. So Michael, thank you for doing the work that you are doing. Where can people find you? Where can they connect with you? Where can they find your book?
You can find the company is called Opioid Clinical Management. So the website is opioidcm.com. And the book is called The Untold Story of the Opioid Crisis in American Healthcare. And you can go to my author website, which is Michael and it's Vasquez, V as in Victor, ASQUEZ.
Well, thank you for joining us. And I wish you continued success in your endeavors, because we want people to be healthy, happy, and living a meaningful life. So to your continued success, and thank you, listeners, for joining us, because without you, the show would not be possible. And if you have anybody in your area or anybody who may be struggling with this, do ask them to listen to it and get educated, get more training and get ahead of it. So to your continued well-being, I also want to thank Juan for making the show technically possible. And be sure to think about others, be kind, and share it out. And be well and take care until next time.
Thank you for being part of Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. We hope you have learned more about how to start living the life you want. Each week on Beyond Confidence, you hear stories of real people who have experienced growth by overcoming their fears and building meaningful relationships. During Beyond Confidence, Divya Parekh shares what happened to her when she stepped out of her comfort zone to work directly with people across the globe. She not only coaches people how to form heart connections, but also transform relationships to mutually beneficial partnerships as they strive to live the life they want. If you are ready to live the life you want and leverage your strengths, learn more at www.divyaparekh.com. And you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. We look forward to you joining us next week.